All right, I'm going to shoot myself in the foot. I'm going to talk about why you should resin cast. I'm your dad, and I'm telling you to resin cast or you're grounded. That's a lame intro. All right, let's go ahead and get into this. So, why resin cast? I am going to be showing off some resin casts in this video, so it's a little bit of a spotlight too. And ultimately, that's on purpose. Not because I'm trying to toot my own horn, but because there's just a very special feeling about creating your own pieces. Now, I'm talking specifically about Bionicle because, that's my channel, right? But also, this is something that applies to other things. If you're somebody else that has other hobbies, if you like making jewelry, I made jewelry for a while. It's a lot of fun. If you're somebody that likes making artwork, I think everybody's done that to some point, right? Furniture, etc. There are so many things that you can do in resin casting, but I'm specifically focused on Bionicle because, again, channel, but also obligations, and also because I think it's what I can relate to. So one thing I wanted to go ahead and showcase in the video is this right here, this helmet, which is a Malum helmet. There's a brand new mold that I actually just pulled today, although I kind of destroyed it. We'll see how that works anyway. But still, creating something like this in 2024, knowing that this is a piece that was discontinued all the way back after 2009, because obviously Bionicle was discontinued after 2009, right? It's really just special to be able to pull this out of a mold and have it in hand. There's really nothing that feels quite like it. I still think that you get a really good sort of dopamine hit when you order a package from somebody else that has something brand new in it, whether it be a knockoff or it be one of their resin casts or 3D prints, etc. Anytime you have your hands on a creative object is just always lovely in its own right. But when you created it yourself, it's on another level. And that's one of the reasons why I want to sort of tell you to try it. But another reason I'm doing this is because I'm not naive. This is a fairly approachable hobby for most people. I know it's not for everybody. Obviously, resin in and of itself is toxic. Like, you got to treat it with respect. If you're young, maybe do it with supervision, because I do think that this is ultimately a thing that kids can approach. But, like, again, having parents around, it's not always the worst thing in the world. And honestly, can actually be a lot of fun to do this with somebody else. See their vision as much as you see yours. But also, if you are somebody that does this by yourself, it's relatively easy, relatively approachable, and honestly, not terribly expensive. There's an initial investment. We'll get into that in a moment, but it's not even technically necessary depending on what you want to do. There are some things that no matter what, when you're resin casting, you need, like resin. Of course, it's in the name, right? And probably silicone, or at least pre-made silicone molds. If you want to make jewelry, you can buy many pre-made molds out there. Sculptures, there are many molds of as well. But if you want to make your own things, buying your own 2-part silicone to make your own molds is also approachable. We'll get back to these in a minute. Now, resin in and of itself can get quite pricey, and I've actually talked about all of the products that I use and still use to this day, so I will link that video towards the end of this one if I remember to do so. But I use a brand of resin that I found just on Amazon called Shabibi. Why did I buy it? 2 reasons, basically. Well, 3. Low viscosity, which means that it degasses relatively easily. Ultra clear, and it has been. And it's pretty cheap. It was $20 for, I think, like 18 ounces or 16 ounces, something like that. That's a part A and a part B, so less. But, that's not bad. I might have those numbers wrong. Again, refer to that video. Ultimately, though, the silicone was actually the thing that was more expensive, and I was surprised by it. By about 1,000 grams, it was $50. Not terrible by any means, and obviously if you buy at a more economic scale in bulk, you're going to be able to get it cheaper, of course, but even that, $50, it's been a year, I still haven't gone through it all, and that's pretty good, all things considered. So I'm not going to complain too much. Why resin cast? It's a lot of fun. There's just... I don't know if I have more words. Hopefully I've sold it, but if you're not somebody that can resin cast, then maybe it's actually worth going out there and supporting your fellow resin casters. And again, it's not to toot my own horn. You don't have to support me, although if you want to, link for Patreon down in the description below. Rather, it's good to support people out there who are keeping your dream, your hobby alive. Lego's not making these in 2024. You can't go on Bricklink and find these listed. Right? But you can find these, and if I ever saw these listed for $10 on Bricklink, I wouldn't buy it. Lego made this. It's not terribly expensive a piece, but if I saw this for $10, I probably would buy it because I know this isn't a Lego piece. This is something that somebody made. And I can really appreciate that. Ultimately, you're not really even paying for the piece when you're paying the price that people demand. And I think $10 for this is perfectly reasonable. Rather, what you're really paying for is that person to keep your dream alive. You're helping to support them, of course. But it's also the understanding that without them out there, Bionicle ends, right? 2024 new pieces basically doesn't happen. Yeah, there are knockoff sets, and I do plan to continue reviewing those in the future as well. I've got one on the way. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're supporting your fellow creatives. It's just like if you were, going to Patreon and supporting people for producing things that you enjoy, link in the description. But also because what they're creating, you're paying for their time, their effort, their ultimately, if they screwed up once or twice too, there's a lot that goes into it, but it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I really think that resin casting, if you are a creative, if you are somebody who likes to create, if you're somebody who likes to do artwork, sculpting, which is something that I really enjoy, if you're somebody that likes just really to get your hands in there and get dirty, this is a lot of fun. But remember, again, it is toxic. Safety is important. You can look up a lot of information online, and for the most part, every resin you buy, every silicone you buy is usually going to either come with a material safety data sheet. I can't remember the name right now, Jesus Christ. But ultimately, look online and play it safe, play it respectful. Wear a mask, wear gloves, any sort of like PPE you might want to wear, old clothes, whatever. Have some solvents on hand if you want to wash it off your skin, if you do get it on your skin, and just play it safe. If you do that, you'll live a good, long, healthy life, and you'll get to enjoy the pieces that you make. Obviously, it's also something that you can do outside of the Bionicle community. Bionicle is not the community that invented resin casting. There's so much that you can do. So if you are somebody that has other hobbies too, this has a lot of bleed over, and it is something you can sell. Not just Bionicle pieces, but if you make cool jewelry, you can sell that too. And maybe I'll show off some of the jewelry I made in the past on the Discord. I have no idea. Discord, also linked in the description. That said, how do you approach resin casting? Like I said, it is daunting the first few times you do it. You think that it's a lot, but it's, in some ways, it's kind of like baking, right? I know that sounds really silly, but I don't think most people approach baking like making pancakes or something, daunting, right? Maybe making something a little more technical is difficult, but this is on the scale of like making pancakes. This is relatively easy stuff. It's not terribly difficult to mix your materials, assuming you have a scale that's relatively accurate. Mine sucks, but it still works for me, even if it's not the most accurate thing in the world, and for some reason likes to zero out just all the time if it's just measuring small increments. I don't know why they designed it to do that. It's disgustingly annoying, but whatever. I'll get a new one in the future. Point still stands, though. Approaching resin casting, most of the obstacles that stand in front of you are the fear of doing it, and then the initial cost. And there is an initial cost if you want really high quality resin casts. High quality resin casts are basically going to require, I'm going to use air quotes, two things. An air compressor, and if you have one already, good, like you're halfway there, but you can find them really easily used. There are a lot of people that go and buy them and then just stop using them, so they sell them online. And you can find them very cheap. Just make sure to inspect them, make sure that they're good, and test them out if you go to buy it yourself. The other expensive thing, though, probably the most expensive thing on this list, is what is called a pressure pot, usually a painter's pot. You can buy pressure pots specifically made for resin casting, but they're very expensive. I don't really recommend them. Also, I have no experience with them specifically, so maybe my opinion would change. But I use a painter's pot that has been adapted to work with resin casting. There are hundreds of tutorials on how to do this yourself. The actual pressure pot itself usually runs around $100. I got mine for $70 on Amazon. It was brand new, so you might be able to find it cheaper. And I did make a video going over all of the stuff that I use, so I'll, again, link that at the end of the video. But the fittings, the things you need to actually convert it to a pressure pot and to connect it to the air compressor runs you about $30. It's not insane. And ultimately, I think my total cost going into resin casting, including the resin, including the silicone, including all that equipment, including some extraneous stuff that I really didn't need to buy and probably shouldn't have bought, but did anyway, was about $300. That sounds like a lot. I would hope for most people that's less than a paycheck. And it's something that I think you could save up for, squirrel away a little bit of money each week or each paycheck, whatever. And in a couple months, you could be up and running, honestly. And it is worth noting, too, that if you have a really good process, that's very important because I definitely don't. But if you do, theoretically, you could make dozens of pieces in a single day. The resin I have is a 24-hour resin, so I'm limited by the amount of time I can make each run of pieces. But like my pressure pot could easily fit 40 pieces in it at a time if I was capable of doing that at that rate, at that speed, and had the space to do that. I would never probably do that at my current setup, but knowing that's a possibility is great. And it does mean, too, that if you were somebody that's looking to do this for profit, there's a lot of profit in it, assuming that you're in a niche that pays well. And Bionicle definitely is one. And as I mentioned before, if I saw a piece like this and it was $10, I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, that's overpriced. If it was Lego, yeah, because they can make this cheap and they're a company that does it en masse. It's their job, right? But as an individual, even though I know the cost that goes into this is only a handful of cents, honestly, I still think this is worth and justifies the price people ask for them. $10 is not unreasonable for something like that. In much the same way as I think someone selling 3D prints for $10 or $15 is not unreasonable at all. These are good costs. These are good uses of time. And what you're paying for most is their ability to continue doing this for the community going forward. Also, as I mentioned, there are going to be other things that crop up, other costs that come up. And ultimately, this is just me speaking from my own personal experience because I know that there are many people in the Bionicle community that make pieces to sell. I also more often make pieces to experiment, to have fun. I really enjoy experimenting, so much so that I very, very briefly had a series on the channel where I was going to do like a weekly Wednesday sort of fun cast, right? Just mixing up colors or just experimenting, doing stuff and resin casting and then revealing what those casts were. It's obviously something that stopped because I stopped resin casting for a while when I got sick and everything was just kind of a mess. And, they weren't like crazy views on the channel or anything, but maybe that's something I get back into in the future because it was a lot of fun. I also plan on making a video in the future once my setup is actually set for this specifically to actually do a video talking about my process as well. But once all that is said and done, once all that is put together, then I hope I've convinced even one person to really go out of their way to do this. Ultimately, a lot of the Bionicle community, before I conclude the video, a lot of the Bionicle community approaches doing resin casting in a similar way, which is totally understandable because why fix what isn't broken? I would be smart to do it their way, right? But I also really enjoy the experimentation. And so when I go out of my way to make molds out of one piece of silicone instead of two, that might not always work. It's not always going to be ideal, but it works for some things. And I can get good looking pieces out of it, but it continues to challenge my brain. I understand completely how a two-part mold works, which is why I wanted to try something different, something I didn't understand. That's often where I find more joy. And doing these one-part molds has been really exciting for me. They don't always come out. They're not always perfect in much the same way as a two-part mold isn't always perfect. But there are some advantages from my opinion, from my point of view, and from my specific setup that actually work in my favor with some of these one-part molds. It would be impossible for me to make this piece exactly like this with two parts because this is a funnel-less piece. There's no fill port on this. This is molded inside. This is not the exact mold for it, but it'll give you the same idea. Inside of a piece where I put the resin in, I rotocast it so it covers everything and the bubbles move to where I want them to move so I can press them out. And then I close it up and there are no gaps left over so that when I pull the piece out, it's nearly perfect, nearly complete, meaning I can pull it out and in theory have very little post-processing, but I also am not left with an artifact, not left with anything behind. In theory, this could lead to a piece that is indistinguishable from an official Bionicle piece. Not in practice with what I have here, because this is not the most transparent silicone in the world, and there are other reasons for that too. But in theory, being able to create a process that could create a Lego piece that is indistinguishable outside of the material itself being different is kind of impressive to just know that that's out there if I want to reach for it, you know? And also the experimentation could be a lot of fun because you can do things that Lego would never do, or you could discover things. And I've showcased this one a dozen times on the channel. So this is not anything brand new or revolutionary now, but at the time when I made this is a process I had never seen before because I stumbled upon it by accident. It's in all intents and purposes, it's a discovery. I don't know if other people have stumbled upon this, but what it allows me to do is diffuse colors into each other rather than have them blend smoothly like a smooth gradient. It diffuses, it sort of stipples together, leaving particles of each interwoven into the other, and it leads to just such a cool and unique end result. A lot of people, when I showed this off, were talking about how it looked like it was airbrushed because it leaves that stippling pattern that is sort of I guess like prominent when it comes to airbrushing. It's also something I'd seen a lot in like classic comic books and things like that, a pattern very similar to that stippling, like I said. Okay, that's pretty much it for the video. I think I've talked myself to death. My throat hurts, and I've tried to record this video forever, but just too many distractions. If you enjoyed the video again, please subscribe. Helps the channel out. You can check out links in the description as mentioned. Patreon is down there if you want to help support the channel, but that's up to you. You definitely don't have to by any means. Also, remember that support goes to the knockoffs specifically so that I can actually feature new sets, new parts on the channel specifically. On top of that, you can check out the Discord link down in the description below. I might actually open up a resin casting channel on the Discord. We've got some other creative channels on there anyway, so why not? And you can do whatever it is that you otherwise do to help with the algorithm. I guess leave a comment. I'll see y'all in the next one. Take care.